Don Rickles' story begins in Queens, New York, where he was born in 1926. He wasn't born into fame or wealth, but into a regular working-class family with strong values and sharp humor. That early environment shaped the man he became. Life in Queens wasn't glamorous. Families worked hard, and survival meant you had to be quick-witted. For Rickles, humor was more than a joke, it was a shield. When you could make people laugh, they forgot about the struggles for a moment. Rickles wasn't a tall or muscular man, so he relied on personality. His sharp tongue became his weapon, and people remembered him for it. Even as a kid, he stood out because he was never afraid to say what others were thinking. The Second World War changed everything for young men of his generation, and Rickles was no exception. He served in the Navy, traveling far from home and seeing the realities of war. Those years hardened him but also deepened his perspective. When he returned home, Rickles didn't know what direction his life would take. He studied acting, hoping to build a career on stage and screen. But Hollywood was not waiting with open arms, and he faced rejection after rejection. As an actor, Rickles was typecast. He wasn't the leading man producers wanted, and he wasn't given serious roles. That struggle forced him to look for another way forward. Instead of giving up, he leaned into what he did best, talking. He began performing stand-up comedy, though his style was far from traditional. Most comedians relied on jokes and stories, but Rickles turned his attention to the people in front of him. He insulted them, and the crowd erupted. At first, people didn't know how to react. Audiences weren't used to a man calling them out directly with brutal honesty. But Rickles had timing, charm, and confidence. Soon, they realized they were laughing not at cruelty, but at truth. The truth was always at the heart of Rickles' comedy. He insulted people, but it wasn't mean-spirited, it was disarming. By pointing out flaws or quirks, he reminded everyone that nobody was above a laugh, not even celebrities. In smoky nightclubs, Rickles sharpened his style. He insulted gangsters, tourists, and even celebrities brave enough to sit in the front. He wasn't intimidated by anyone, and that fearlessness separated him from other comics of his time. His big break came in Las Vegas. The city was booming in the 1950s, and entertainers fought for attention. Rickles stood out because he didn't just perform, he attacked, verbally, with precision. He was a gladiator armed with words. One of the most famous moments of his career came when Frank Sinatra walked into the club. Everyone knew Sinatra's reputation, he was powerful, feared, and deeply respected. Most performers would bend over backward to please him. Not Don Rickles. When he saw Sinatra, he insulted him without hesitation. "Make yourself at home, Frank, hit somebody." The crowd froze, waiting for Sinatra's reaction. Then Sinatra laughed, and the room exploded with relief. That moment changed everything. Sinatra loved Rickles' boldness and became one of his biggest supporters. In Las Vegas and beyond, Sinatra's approval meant doors opened. Rickles suddenly had access to stages and audiences that once seemed impossible. Performing for Sinatra's circle gave Rickles exposure to the Rat Pack, politicians, and even presidents. Yet, no matter how famous his audience was, Rickles never changed. He treated them all the same, roasting without mercy. His television appearances added to his fame. On The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Rickles became a regular guest. Carson adored him, often giving him space to unleash unfiltered comedy that left audiences gasping for air. But Rickles wasn't just a guest. He became a staple of American culture. His roast performances on television cemented his image as the insult king. Nobody escaped, not even Ronald Reagan or Don's closest friends. Yet, behind all the laughter, Rickles carried a strong sense of principle. His comedy was meant to entertain, but his real life was guided by loyalty and honesty. He valued true friendship and despised arrogance and dishonesty. This is where Rickles differed from many comedians. Some used their humor to mask bitterness or jealousy. Rickles didn't hide behind his jokes. His humor was honest, and sometimes that honesty revealed who he truly disliked. Hollywood during Rickles' era was filled with oversized egos. Stars polished their images, creating illusions of perfection. Rickles had no patience for that. He believed everyone was human and deserved to be laughed at. But Rickles drew a line. If he liked you, the insults were affectionate. If he didn't like you, the sharpness cut deeper. Audiences may not have noticed at first, but insiders knew when his barbs came from real anger. The people he respected, like Sinatra, Carson, and Bob Newhart, were often roasted with warmth hidden beneath the sting. The people he couldn't stand, though, felt the cold edge of his words. That difference made his comedy even more powerful. Rickles was never shy about his opinions. If he disliked someone, he made it known, sometimes on stage and sometimes behind closed doors. This honesty earned him respect from friends but also created enemies along the way. The irony was that Rickles, known as Mr. Warmth, could sometimes be the coldest man in the room. His comedy persona wasn't fake, it was an extension of his personality. He didn't sugarcoat, not in comedy and not in life. Even in Hollywood, where smiles were often fake, Rickles was real. That authenticity made him beloved by many but also highlighted the moments when his dislike for someone couldn't be hidden. He simply wasn't built to pretend. His comedy career flourished, but with every roast, every appearance, people wondered who Rickles truly liked and who he truly despised. For most, the insult was just an act. For a select few, it was a window into his real feelings. The man he couldn't stand stood out because Rickles' dislike wasn't about competition. It was deeper than career rivalry. It came from clashing values, where Rickles' loyalty and honesty met someone else's arrogance and pretension. Even Rickles' closest friends noticed the difference. They could laugh at his insults because they knew they were rooted in love. But when Rickles turned his sharp tongue towards someone he disliked, the atmosphere shifted. Rickles once said his goal was to make people laugh together, to remind everyone of their humanity. But he couldn't force laughter where respect didn't exist. That's why this one man became the subject of his most brutal truth. Fans adored Rickles because he seemed fearless. But his comedy also revealed his principles. He didn't stand for dishonesty or inflated egos, and when he saw those traits, he used his stage to call them out. The rise of Don Rickles was a rise of raw honesty. He proved that comedy didn't have to be polite or safe. It could be biting, truthful, and risky. And those risks made him unforgettable. But with fame came bigger challenges. Rickles was no longer roasting small audiences in nightclubs. He was now facing the most powerful stars and personalities in the world. Among them was the man who tested his patience more than anyone. This chapter shows the foundation of Rickles' life and career. It reveals how his humor was born from survival, shaped by honesty, and sharpened by fearlessness. It also sets the stage for the conflict that defined his most personal dislike. Because in the world of Don Rickles, laughter was universal, except when it came to one man who embodied everything Rickles despised. And that brutal truth would define the next chapter of his story. Don Rickles built a career on making fun of everyone, but there was always a difference between affection and dislike. His closest friends knew it instantly. The warmth was there when he respected someone, but the coldness was real when he didn't. The man who stood out as Rickles' most disliked figure was Ernest Borgnine. Hollywood adored Borgnine for his acting talent and charm, but Rickles saw a side of him that clashed with his own values. Their personalities never fit together. Borgnine was known for his big laugh and larger-than-life energy. He enjoyed being the center of attention and had a reputation for being unpredictable. Rickles, who valued humility and loyalty, never warmed to that showy personality. In private circles, Rickles joked about everyone, but when Borgnine's name came up, the tone shifted. The jokes weren't playful, they were cutting. Insiders noticed that Rickles seemed irritated whenever Borgnine was around. The tension between them wasn't one explosive moment but a series of interactions. Borgnine loved being loud and dominating conversations. Rickles hated arrogance, and he saw Borgnine's behavior as crossing the line between fun and self-indulgence. Rickles' comedy was built on knocking powerful people down to size, but Borgnine acted as if he was above it. That arrogance fueled Rickles' dislike. He couldn't respect someone who couldn't laugh at themselves. Hollywood insiders often said that Rickles measured people by how they handled his insults. Sinatra loved them, Carson laughed, and Reagan even enjoyed being roasted. Borgnine didn't. He took things personally, and that killed the humor. Rickles believed comedy was a way to bond. But with Borgnine, there was no bond. Every attempt Rickles made on stage toward him seemed to widen the gap instead of closing it. They were simply wired too differently. The irony was that Borgnine's career soared in the 1950s and 1960s, the same time Rickles was finding his voice. They crossed paths often, and each time, Rickles' dislike grew sharper. He saw Borgnine as everything he disliked about Hollywood. Borgnine liked to play up his own legend, reminding people of his Oscars and achievements. Rickles, on the other hand, mocked that type of self-promotion. He believed success should speak for itself, not be worn like a badge. This difference in values became a wall between them. Rickles valued authenticity, while Borgnine enjoyed theatrics. To Rickles, that felt fake, and he had no patience for fakeness. He refused to hide his feelings behind a smile. In public, Rickles roasted Borgnine with a harder edge than he gave others. It wasn't the affectionate sting he gave Sinatra or Carson. Instead, it was irritation disguised as comedy, and audiences could sometimes feel the tension. Privately, Rickles admitted to friends that Borgnine wasn't his type of guy. He didn't respect the way he carried himself, and he couldn't stand the ego that seemed to follow him everywhere. That dislike stayed with him for decades. The Hollywood machine loved Borgnine, but Rickles wasn't Hollywood's machine. He was an outsider who thrived by tearing down illusions. Borgnine represented the kind of illusion Rickles wanted no part of. That's why his dislike was so strong.